Welcome to the first episode of the Chantelle Show here on Reality Check Radio. It's Friday afternoon, it's 4 o'clock, and we're kicking into the very first episode of what I hope will become a mainstream, incredible show for you guys. And I thought when I was doing this show, I was thinking about what I want to bring to New Zealanders, what is important for me, and it really came down to this whole idea of censorship and the side of the media and the side of what's going on around the world that the media don't show you. So that's what I want this show to be about the things that the media don't say here in New Zealand, and how can we unpick these amazing international stories that are coming out and make them mainstream here in New Zealand. But I also got thinking, I have grown to, a small amount of popularity, however you see it, here in New Zealand for live streaming. And I think some of the infamous live streams would be during the Parliament protest, where I spent sometimes 8, 12 hours, however long it was, on my phone, talking with you guys, interacting with crowds. But that's a very different scenario when there's so much action happening around you to just sitting here in a studio by yourself, chit-chatting to what seems, pretty much like no one outside of a few interviews. And unlike what you may have heard, I don't really love the sound of my own voice. So I thought I'd bring along someone who I think is an amazing human being, very interesting, and has a slightly different kind of political view to me, to help co-host a little bit of what we do and talk us through some of these fantastic, interesting topics that are coming out of other countries around the world. So I bring to you someone you may not have ever seen before, the wonderful Alistair Harding, my executive producer. Alistair, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Chantelle. It's really nice to be here and to be working with you on this amazing project. And I can't help but look back on how far we've come since you and I first met and we started working together. It was, if I remember rightly, we started working together about a week before the convoy, before the protests in Wellington. And we met outside the High Court where we were covering a case there for the Hood, and we started working together. And then, of course, about a week later, doesn't seem that long, we ended up driving down to Wellington in the convoy, following all of that, and then becoming part of New Zealand's greatest ever protest. It was just an incredible experience. And during that time, you and I, you were in a camper van, and so was I, about 4 camper vans away from each other on the law school car parked illegally, I might add. And I think it was just incredible working with you during that time. I was there working on my documentary, We Came Here for Freedom, filming it, which is the first part is out now and the second part's coming soon. And you, of course, were doing your Facebook living, which was an absolutely incredible journey, which so many people went with you on. And so I just think this is a really special moment for us, that we get together on a new radio station, Reality Check Radio. All that time that we were in Wellington, we were complaining and discussing and about how the media wasn't doing its job. And now we get the chance to try and put that right, I suppose. So it's an absolutely amazing opportunity, and thanks for having me on the show.
It's really amazing, and we have so treasured working with you and your incredible work with your documentary, We Came Here for Freedom, and the other work that you've done helping out numerous people from different political groups with amazing videos to just giving people insight into what's really going on here. And your background in the media and journalism has been vital for me to help me understand stories, understand how to unpick stories. So I'm excited. I think, we're a great duo. And we'll have something exciting to bring to the New Zealand public. So hopefully they see it the same way.
I think so. And why do you want to do this show? What's your driving? What's your passion behind this one? If we're talking about stories which haven't been talked about in New Zealand or have only been talked about a little bit, why do you want to talk about this?
It's something that I I've been wanting people to do here in New Zealand. I've been waiting to find that media myself that was starting to bring out stories we don't hear here. And I'm not talking about kind of the fringe stories. I'm talking more about the fundamental basics of what's happening politically, what's happening geopolitically, like what's going on, what are the movements, what's driving people in these different countries to make the actions that they're making. And so I wanted to understand that for myself. And so I think a real driving force behind this is just that desire to learn, the desire to understand, and then to help other people understand what's going on here. Because I truly believe that at the end of the day, the more educated you are, the more you understand kind of the systems and the forces that work behind media, work behind political parties, and you can really start to almost see things as they're unraveling and go, oh, okay, that's that thing in practice, that's this thing in practice. And it makes you a more educated and kind of have a bit more interesting perspectives on the world. So that's really what I'm excited about doing here, just helping people feel more educated and informed.
One thing for me about all of this is that ever since I call this period, these last 3 years, the madness. And over those 3 years, I've been watching around the world. I remember very early on when we went into the very first lockdown and watching a protest at Trafalgar Square. There were tens of thousands of people. I was talking to someone recently who was there, and she was of the opinion there were about 50,000 people there, filling up Trafalgar Square. And there were choppers going overhead and there were policemen everywhere. And then the person I was talking to actually was from a monastery near Hyde Park, opposite the Speaker's Corner there. And she said that they had gone out onto the street to watch these people going past. And usually a protest would take about 10 minutes to walk past that monastery. But on this particular day, all of those protesters walking past, it took them over 2 hours. And so to me, that's one of the reasons why I want to talk about all of this, is because these things have been happening for the last 3 years and our media have not been showing it. They have not been telling us about it. And I look at it and I think this is probably the biggest protest movement in history. And, when we start talking about these stories today, our first story that we're going to talk about is exactly that. What's been happening in France over the last few weeks. And when you look in our New Zealand media, it hardly gets shown at all. So I think that this is a wonderful opportunity for us to actually talk about these things and, actually look at them through the eyes of people overseas and tell New Zealanders about them. I think it's a wonderful opportunity we have here. So this is great. I'm really looking forward to this journey that we're going on.
That is incredible. I love that, Alistair. And you're so right. There is so many movements that happen internationally. The Iraqis standing up against war in their own country just for America to completely blindside them. And even Tony Blair as well, who was the UK's Prime Minister at the time, advocating for that war. And Jacinda Ardern, our infamous Prime Minister, trained under him. So there's all these moves that happen and the media choose which stories to suppress and which stories to push. And so it'll be fun deep diving into these stories that they look to suppress and getting into the nitty gritty of the why and who's driving it.
So should we get into it?
Let's go.
So let's get stuck in. Europe is burning. What's been going on in France, Chantelle?
Europe is burning. And for people that have followed French politics for a while, you know that the French do love to protest. But what it seems like that's been happening lately is it's escalated on a scale that we've never seen before. Now, what's happened recently is President Macron, he decided that he was going to push through legislation to raise the pension age without a vote. So people in France have lost it. They have been protesting in what's estimated to be over 1 million people out in the streets, including trade unions and socialist unions have been hitting the streets demanding that he roll back this legislation. They've even had 2 votes now of no confidence in President Macron. Both of those have failed. So now that both of those have failed, it looks like this legislation will be going through. And Alistair, what is your take on this? Because I know you've been looking into a little bit of who these protesters are and the impact that it's having on the kind of the wider Paris region as well.
Yeah, to me, when you look at all of these these protests. We're seeing videos coming through sporadically. And then you start looking in the media. One of the biggest things that you notice are photographs of the streets of Paris. And you see two things. Number one, you see people protesting at night, burning things, throwing things, clashing with the riot police, all of those different things. And then the other thing that you see a lot of is trash building up on the streets. And, this is the trade unions getting involved. And I suppose, that's what happens when you protest in France is, you go back to the Yellow Vest Revolution of 2018. Excuse me. You go back to the Yellow Vest Revolution of 2018. It was the same sort of thing. These protests are massive. And it's incredible to me that you don't see too much of them in the media. A couple of points here that I've noticed, in France, retirees are paid 50% of their income with at a maximum of 41,000 euros per year. I'm guessing that is. And when these laws that they're talking about, these pension laws, the first time they came into effect was in 1910. When life expectancy was 51.3 years, whereas now it's 82.4 years old. Also, the population has increased exponentially since 1910 and now stands at around 65 million compared to 39 million in 1910. And as we were discussing this before the show, you came up with some very interesting ideas about perhaps why this is happening is that the French government has been pushed into doing this because of those figures growing and also birth rates decreasing you were talking about. And I thought that was a really interesting point to make.
I've looked into the French birth rates before, so to me it was something that stood out immediately. The minute you try to raise the pension age, it's telling us a few things. A, the state of your economy is in failure, hence why you're making decisions that you know will be vastly unpopular because you have an aging population in France and you have had an aging population for many, many years. And so the minute that I heard that, they're raising the pension age, I thought, oof, those birth rates will really be suffering. And so I started to research a little bit more and get their up-to-date birth rates. This is the real issue. If you do not have enough children being born into your society, then you don't have workers coming into the workforce to then sustain people that are coming out of the workforce. It's a problem all around the West. It's a problem here in New Zealand. I actually went to listen to a talk that Don Brash gave a few years ago. Was it Don Brash or someone else? But we discussed this at one stage. The birth rates of our country are a real problem here in New Zealand. They're a problem in France. And for example, back in 2000, they had a birth rate of 2.1. So that means 2.1 children per family in France. Now, the reason you need a birth rate of at least 2.1 is because that's sustaining the people that are exiting the workforce. Their current birth rate is down to only 1.7. 1.7. So they do not have enough children being born in France to sustain the pensioners they've already got. And what this is going to mean is their healthcare system is not going to be able to be sustainable because as people get older, more people rely on healthcare. If you don't have these young workers working and earning tax and that being able to be recycled back into the healthcare system, you're going to have big gaps in your funding for healthcare as well. So the birth rate really impacts every single aspect of French life. And that's something that the West has not been talking about. We've actively been discouraging people from having children, saying we need to lower the population rates, when actually the opposite is true. We need more children, particularly if we want to enact initiatives that are going to be, green and sustainable. All of those initiatives take more money. So if we've got less money coming into the economy, we're not going to be able to enact the measures that these younger kids want because they've been told that these measures are going to be great for them. So it's a real problem what's happening in France. And this is actually a direct quote from President Macron. He said, "If we don't enact these reforms, the current system is in danger," adding that the new plans would ensure that France's pension system remains financially viable for decades to come. Now that's concerning because if you take that decades to come, he's saying that they don't even have a viable system over the next decade or over the next 2 decades. He's worried that they're going to collapse within that time or potentially collapse within that time. So they, as you said, the life expectancy has shot up, but that also means, again, there's more pressure on the healthcare system, more pressure financially. So I'm really fascinated to see what France manages to do. And some of the leading people that are protesting against this are more left-wing, are more socialist-based. And so the issue is, once you give people something for free, it's very hard to roll that back without severe repercussions. And that's exactly what the French are dealing with at the moment.
Yeah, and you know, when you talk about it like that, you realize that Macron probably has a point. But the way he's going about it is it's quite incredible, really. He's trying to push something through without any vote. That means he's just trying to rule by decree. And I find that really interesting. There's a quote that I saw that jumped out at me from NBC News in the United States. And it's from a 16-year-old young man from France. I won't attempt to pronounce his name. He said, "We are here to show that we support the movement against the pension reform of the people, and that we are all against that kind of system of democracy where you can pass a law without a vote, and that we advocate a better democracy," he said. And I think that's where it comes down to, is that we have been dealing with very high-handed forms of government all over the world for the last 3 years, and this is where it's coming to. And we're also seeing this. We're also seeing this with the Dutch farmers, weren't we? And you know, that leads us into the next topic that we're going to talk about. And this is something also that you experienced directly yourself when you were over in Europe last year.
Yep, absolutely. One topic that I really want to help educate people on here in New Zealand is what's really going on in the Netherlands and with the Netherlands farms and with the carbon tax that they're trying to enact over in the Netherlands. So we're going to get into all of that and more, but first we're going to take a break for you to listen to a few amazing bits of music, and then we're going to come right back and get you informed on what's going on in the Netherlands. You're listening to The Chantelle Baker Show, and this is Reality Check Radio. Welcome back to the Chantelle Baker Show. This is Reality Check Radio. Now, we've just been kicking off a conversation, myself and my executive producer, Alistair Harding, about what's really happening in Europe. And the next thing that I would really like to talk to you guys about is the recent Netherlands elections. Now, as a few of you may know, if you follow our social medias, I've actually been in the Netherlands back in November. I stayed with a local politician who's in local body politics. I met many of the farmers. I went to a huge farmers event that was, to be honest, absolutely fantastic. And so I have been closely following what's happened over in the Netherlands. And it is an incredible story of perseverance, of dedication, of not being bullied by the government, and of really standing up for their fundamental rights to survive as individuals, particularly for the farming industry in the Netherlands to survive. So what's recently happened in a landslide shock, there's been a party called the Farmers Citizens Movement, and it's called BBB. It's got some big Dutch name that I can't pronounce well, so I won't butcher it for the poor people. But they have won 17 seats in the Senate, which makes them the majority party in the Senate over in the Netherlands, which has only 75 seats in it. So Parliament is in uproar. It's been fantastic for the farmers. It's a really shocking win, and it's going to be interesting to see how they manage to lay out the policies they find important in any future coalition. So because they've got the majority seats, it doesn't necessarily mean that they will get a coalition, because the current president, Mark Rutte, current Prime Minister, he may choose to go with the left-leaning side of Parliament and create a coalition that way, although it would be very surprising given that he's more of a conservative. So at the moment, it seems like he may have to work with the Farmers Citizens Party, and they will be a very interesting coalition, considering he was the one to bring in this initial nitrogens tax, which was going to see many, many farmers lose their farms. They were going to be forcibly sold out to the government, and they were going to lose a lot of their livestock. They were going to have to murder their own livestock. So it's been an absolute uproar, and I'm really excited for them.
This was an incredible story all of last year, eh? We watched all of the protests all over through the videos and through the photographs that we saw, trucks jamming up the motorways, the Dutch farmers hanging, they did all sorts of interesting things, didn't they? Like hanging their flags upside down and wearing red bandanas and all of that. And one thing that I remember about this is that the global media didn't really talk about it much at all. And it was a very frustrating thing for us who were following it. And I find it really funny now when I look at the Guardian newspaper, which is one of the core elite news organizations around the world. And there's a quote in one of their stories about this saying, symbolized by a Dutch flag hanging upside down, the BBB has drawn global attention, with farmers' protests blockading highways, dumping manure on roads and rallying outside politicians' houses. And then they say, extensively covered by the international media.
Do you know what I love? Do you know what cracks me up so much about that story? They haven't even got the flag thing right. Because it's not the BBB, which is the Farmer Citizen Movement. So that is one party. Now, there are many, many parties in the Netherlands. They're usually made up of a majority of smaller parties. There were many parties that supported the farmers, and they were all hanging their flags upside down. So it's not this one political group was hanging the flags upside down. That's absolutely false. It was every single person that agreed with farmers, no matter which political party they were part of, would hang their flags upside down, would wear the red bandana as a show of support. All of these people were doing that regardless of the political group. So that's not even, you can tell they really didn't follow this story closely, or else they would also know that. So this is one of the key things I think with media is they like to think they're ahead of something the minute it gets popular. And that's what we've seen them do here. But what was really amazing is the minute that we landed kind of in the Netherlands, you started to see these red bandanas, and particularly when we went out, because we went to an area which is Friesland. So there's many farmers out there, and nearly every second car had a bandana, had some kind of red flag, had the flags upside down. They had signs in support. And I mean, you're talking huge companies were showing their support as well. So Fonterra in the Netherlands, they were hanging the signs outside of their massive company there, which was a really amazing sight to see that there was all these huge corporations that were also supporting the farmers, because they understand that if the farmers go under, or if this legislation does get pushed through, that so many farmers would lose their land, would lose their farms, that it would not be worth being in business anymore. And when we talked with one of the farmers, I remember one of them had these beautiful Jersey dairy cows, and we did an interview, and the cows are surrounding me and they're jumping on top of each other and they're playing around, and they were so inquisitive and gorgeous cows, so beautifully looked after. And the fields in the Netherlands are some of the best producing fields in the world, and they have very small herd numbers in the Netherlands. So to a Netherlands farmer, having 150 or 200 cows is considered a large herd. Now here in New Zealand, we can have hundreds and hundreds of cows, and it's not really that large. We could have a few thousand, these kind of numbers are thrown around here. Whereas over in the Netherlands, 150 cows, you've got a pretty massive farm on your hands. So these cows are looked after very well. They have a lot of room. They're really well fed. And so this concept that I've seen some journalists putting out of, these cows are over farmed and they're kept in terrible conditions, false. It's just false narratives that they're putting out there to try and justify the government telling these farmers that they would need to kill 50% of their stock to fall within their so-called emissions targets.
So this election victory, is that going to put a stop to that, do you think?
Well, it'll make it very difficult for Mark Rutte to push through that legislation, because he might have to go into an active coalition with the farmers. But what you may find is, because the the farmers movement is made up of predominantly everyday people. It's not people that are really slick. It's not people that necessarily have much of a legal background, anything like that. So it'll be fascinating to see if they get their goals achieved with just a majority, or how they manage to build out their support around them internally. I think their support, like even little things such as your assistants, such as the people giving you advice, if you get a whole lot of government people coming to you to offer you that advice and then you hire them, you may find that they get a little bit more manipulated than what their initial goals are. And so it'll be interesting over the next few years to watch closely as that plays out and find out, can everyday people really win a majority and change things? or will they simply get manipulated by people that are kind of already inside the system? So I'm fascinated to see how they manage to do.
And I know you've got an interview coming up about this, and we should probably get into that. But one last thing that I want to talk about with this is that I find very interesting is that the Dutch are a big farming nation, and so are we. And they've just had an election, and we've got an election coming up this year as well. And I wonder whether there are parallels to be drawn about what happened there and what might happen here as well.
I personally do not think so for the farming community here in New Zealand. And the reason I don't think so is this. When you are in the Netherlands, and actually we went to Ukraine as well, and I see similarities between those two countries in terms of the determination of the people. You had these young Ukrainian 17-year-olds saying that they're going to go to war and sacrifice themselves to protect their land. You had the Dutch farmers saying they were going to go to war against the government, theoretically go to war, go to war, in terms of they were willing to shut down airports. They were willing to protest and shut down whole supermarkets, the delivery of supplies to supermarkets. They shut down massive motorways for weeks on end. They would protest, and they did not give up. And they got their message out there, and they fought every step of the way, and everyone was united. And it was this really incredible, organic, strong movement. The farmers that go and protest here in New Zealand, they go, oh, I went there and I went to the side of the road so everyone could easily pass me, and I just waited there and I didn't really do that much, and now I feel like I've got somewhere. And they'll do their one protest a year and then sit back. And I understand, because farming is very difficult to do. It's really difficult to try and keep the farm running if you're off protesting. I completely understand why they take that road, but I think New Zealanders are so passive. The Netherlands farmers have not been passive, and it's won them a huge victory. Whereas here in New Zealand, I remember talking to the head of one of the big farmers groups, and he said, we won't join in on this one big particular protest that was happening in New Zealand because we're going to stage our own. It's going to be great, and it's going to go, if it needs to, for months. And none of that ended up happening. And I think here in New Zealand, there's a real lack of fight amongst the farmers here. They'd kind of just go, oh, well, I'll just sell to carbon, or I'll kind of give up. There's a few fighters, but they haven't really made themselves vocal anywhere near on the scale as the Netherlands farmers. And I'm concerned for them because I'm passionate about farmers. I'm passionate about farmers being sustainable and getting ahead. I'm passionate about them staying alive, because the mental health of farmers in our country is one of the most affected groups of people, particularly in men. So it's just an area that I really, really want to see thrive. I want to see them succeed. But if they take anything from the Netherlands win, it's that they're going to probably need to do a lot more to try and get ahead than what they've currently been doing at the moment. And that's just from seeing the success in either country. I mean, here, Jacinda Ardern wouldn't even honour her meeting. She said she'd give one of the farming groups. So she couldn't even honour one meeting, and yet over there, the farmers are winning the majority. I think that kind of tells you a lot about the impact of these two sides.
There's also another thing about it too, that what the Dutch farmers were facing was imminent. It was happening. It is happening, isn't it? There are farmers being forced off their land, and it is still more of an idea here in New Zealand. They're still talking through it. I think as it gets closer and farmers start to realise just how dangerous the talk is that's going on inside those parliament buildings, we're probably going to see a little bit of panic set in, perhaps.
I think a big telling sign will be the Resource Management Act that the government are currently trying to push through and blindside everybody with. Now, they went to push through this back in December, and they always do this right before Parliament breaks for the year. They rush through a whole lot of legislation, hoping that all the MPs are tired and people just kind of go, oh, all that Parliament isn't all there. And they often rush it through under urgency, so no one has a lot of time to check all of these bills. They don't have their full teams given weeks on end to make sure they can go through it all in detail. Now, the Resource Management Act was 1,800 pages long, and it's all about co-governance for every piece of land in New Zealand. And so this is the problem, is that we're looking at potentially a huge land grab here in New Zealand. This is just a potential based on what this legislation may mean in the future. And so it's very, very scary what they're looking at doing here when it comes to co-governance with land. Now, our media here are talking about three waters and the co-governance of the water, but they're ignoring the co-governance of the land. And this could directly affect farmers that do own large portions of land up and down the country. Now, in the Netherlands, when we went to leave, I think it was about November, when we went to leave the Netherlands, there were only meant to be 600 farms being kind of forcibly taken by the government. Yes, they were paying for people, but people did not want to get off their land. So I call it forcibly taking that land. And then by the time it was a few months down the track, that had escalated to 3,000 farms and the kill-off of potentially 50% of their stock. These farmers love their stock. Yeah, it was not gonna go down. And so I think that we may not start to see that same level of pushback here in New Zealand until people realise that they're trying to push through similar objectives here. So it's kind of a wait and see game. What legislation will they try and do here? What won't they try and do? But we've already had similar land grabs when it comes to significant natural areas where farmers were designated massive portions of their farms as significantly natural if they've planted out native trees that they've planted. And so what that means is that then that land can no longer be farmed ever again. So they don't get any money for it. So the government essentially just goes, mine, and there's nothing you can do. So it's a really scary future for our farmers here.
And I actually have a friend who that's happened to, who lives nearby us here and in the central North Island. And it's a really scary prospect because there's not much they can do about it. Really, they either sell up at a loss or they lump it and they just have to live with it. But having said that, we do need to get on to your interview, and hopefully we find out a little bit about how the farmers dealt with that, so that when it does come our way, some of our farmer listeners will know what to do.
All right, everybody, you're listening to Reality Check Radio, and this is the Chantelle Baker Show. Today we are talking with the incredible Angela, who is over in the Netherlands. She's been working closely with the farmers and the big protests that have been happening over there, and she's also running in politics as well. So Angela, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to be here.
So can you explain to people listening at home that don't have much understanding, can you give them a rough rundown of what's happened in the Netherlands over the last 6 months?
Over the last 6 months, basically it was focused on our farmers because our government just wants to get rid of our farmers and because they want their farmer ground. They want to build houses and I guess we all know the plans, what the government wants. They want to make a tri-state city of the Netherlands, one big city. And therefore, the farmers have to go because they own much of the land over here. And therefore, they use the card of the climate change and nitrogen. And the farmers, I guess the Dutch farmers are the biggest threat to the whole future of this world because of the cows and the nitrogen. So, yeah, it's unbelievable. So they discover or they come with all kinds of rules that the farmers have to go. And somehow nitrogen has also been a way of treating things like a coin. If a farmer goes, then the nitrogen, the part that the farmer can use for nitrogen, they can sell it or give it to some other company. Like, for instance, Tata Steel is a very big company over here, very polluting, but they can nitrogen, extra nitrogen, so they can pollute more with nitrogen. Or a big company that makes products from cows, milks, cheese, etc. And they buy the nitrogen pollution from farmers so they can even grow bigger. So yeah, maybe that's a complex story, but Our government is doing whatever they can to get rid of the farmers. They try it politely, and they become more and more aggressively. And the farmers have been protesting because their future, not their future, but everybody's future, depends on that. The government is not listening. They say, okay, we want to go discuss with you and see if we can come to some agreement. But the only agreement is that the farmers have to go. So the farmers did a lot of protesting. That didn't help. And the only thing that the farmers could see on a peaceful way was to vote our corrupt government out. So the last couple of weeks, a big campaign has started, vote them out, because last week on March 15th, we had our elections from the province. And that was a way, if the coalition, the government, got voted out and the opposition got more votes, that is a chance that the plans of a government won't go through. So it was very important to vote them out. Big campaign everywhere, posters, and a huge rally on March 11. And it worked because the opposition did win. And now there is the government, the coalition that is governing our country is panicking because the Dutch people have given a big sign that we all stand behind our farmers. There's only one thing. They voted for the BBB. That's the party saying for the farmers. And it's not 100% clear if it's truly a victory for the farmers.
So
because
who are the people that are behind BBB? Because I know when I was over in the Netherlands, the upside down farmers' flags and the red bandanas, they weren't for necessarily the BBB party. It was just people that stood in solidarity with the farmers. Is that right?
Yeah. That was
who runs the BBB party, and how are they different to some of the other groups, such as the farmers we met, like Ninka Koopmans? How are they different to some of those parties that these farmers are involved in?
The BBB is a political party. So the groups from Ninka, that's also farmer groups. But Ninka is also part of a political party. And that is also very pro-farmers. And the BBB also says it's pro-farmers. But the difference between the party from Ninka, the BVNL, or the Forum for Democracy, they are really against the government. And they want all the plans of the nitrogen to be stopped, because there is no nitrogen problem. It's only a government problem. And the BBB, it's a party that is for the farmers, and also a lot of farmers are part of it. They don't deny the nitrogen problem. They want to go in contact with our government and to say it doesn't have to stop in 2030, but give more time to 2035. So they are pro-farmers, but I'm not sure if they are actually the right party. So it's a big win for the farmers and for the Netherlands that the people voted the government out and voted for a party pro-farmers. But I'm not 100% sure if this party is actually going to do what we hope they will.
So do they have, I mean, they won, 17 seats, is that right? So do they have enough good candidates for those 17 seats, or are they a lot smaller and they didn't even realize that they would have to find 17 candidates?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Right, they were really small, and they massively did win. So they don't have enough good candidates for that. And that is that depends on what they are going to do. Are they going to take people from other parties, like the VVD, CDA, which are part of the government that we wanted to go out? So if they do that, it's not a good sign. Although some of those parties, people from those parties all over the regions, do not stand behind their own party anymore. And besides that, I've heard from the farmers that there are a lot of good farmers getting ready to be active in that party. So we have to see what happens, because just like you say, it's not clear if they have enough good party members and if they have the right party members.
So from what I can understand, it means that the BBB party now control the Senate, but who controls the House? Does that work in a similar way to kind of American style politics, or how does your entire parliament, like the setup of your parliament, how is that in operation, and who kind of controls each faction?
Oh, that's I was never into politics. But it is, we have the first chamber. Those are the ones that's the coalition. They make all the rules and all the decisions, and they're heading more towards a dictatorship, like in a lot of other countries. And then we have the first house, and the members of those first house are chosen based on the elections that we just had from the provinces. So the people that were chosen from the provinces, they make, they can control the coalition. So they have more power. But it's a bit unclear, because we have the coalition who's ruling, and then we have the second room, as we call it, and they have to listen to each other. But our current government doesn't listen to anybody. Even if the second room votes no, the coalition and the rulers have to listen to them, but they don't.
Why do they not legally have to listen to them? How are they getting away and around that?
I want to say, I don't know. And that's exactly their answer. Like, I have no memory of it. Like, our Prime Minister Rutte is doing whatever he does. And when people call him and say, you cannot do that, they're like, oh, no, I don't know. So they just go ahead like dictators. And you cannot discuss with them on content, only on, they attack on emotions or whatever. So they just go ahead. You can do whatever you want.
What is some of the legislation that he's put through that hasn't gone through the proper process, or that the Senate or whoever has declined, but they've still pushed through? What is some of that legislation?
The CBDC.
Also central bank digital currency?
Yeah.
Interesting. So they pushed that through even though it was voted against?
Yeah. Oops, it was decided in Belgium in the European Parliament. Oops, sorry.
Oh, so is that being rolled out across all of Europe?
I guess so, but that's also very powerful of them. They are silent about it. They don't tell which legislations they pass. They are silent on it, and the mainstream media is just like in every country. So it's a game they play everywhere. The mainstream media is also silent, and we, the people that are awake, trying to wake up people, like, look what's happening. Look what's happening. Just also with the corona measurements. We said, oh, if these measurements, if it's accepted and the rules are accepted, we never get rid of it. And the people, even my family, was saying like, no, that's just a conspiracy. But now it's permanent, so they can, whatever pandemic comes along, they can do whatever they want again.
So how are people feeling on the ground now? Are the farmers excited? Is there still a bit of caution? Like, what is the entire feeling that you're getting when you're going to all the movements and some of the events, things like that? What has been the feedback that people are giving you?
Mixed. The farmers are very happy, and not all farmers. The people, most of the people are just happy, like, yes, we did it. We got the biggest party. But the people that are really awake and know what's happening, they are really cautious, like, let's see what happens. We don't know if it's the right party, but that's just a smaller group. So a lot of people voted for the BBB because a lot of farmers had their signs and posters along the highway and near the flags. So people that really felt they wanted to support the farmers just thought, okay, I have to vote that party, and didn't look elsewhere. Because the other opposition, like the BVNL, Forum for Democracy, are still considered to be parties for the conspiracy theorist, extreme right. Most of the people...
Do you agree with that? Do you agree with how they are said to be far right? Do you think that that's accurate, or do you think that that's not an accurate description?
No. Yeah. I guess they just switch. Far right is left, and left is right. And there was a very nice interview a few weeks ago of two people, one from Ongehoord Nederland, ON. He's making on the mainstream media the alternative sound, and Max from Café Weltschmerz. They are also considered far-right alternative media. And they had a very great conversation about it. And they said, I always considered myself to be left. And we were going to rallies and organizing rallies in the 80s. And I don't know what happened. And now we are far-right. So it is not far-right. It's just a way... it's just like in the US. They just, because you don't go with the narrative, you are far right. But they are everything except far right.
Do you think they've just renamed classic liberal to be far
right? What did you say?
Do you think they've just renamed the classic liberal voter as far right?
Yes. Because I was... a liberal. I always was left. And to be honest, I guess 5-6 years ago, with the elections, I had a big fight with my brother because he voted Forum for Democracy. And now I had to apologize because I felt he was far right. And now I did the same and I was always left. I didn't change, but their definition changed.
A very similar thing seems to be happening in a number of countries. And a final wrap-up question, Angela. What do you think were some of the main key things that BBB did that made them so successful when it came to voter turnout? Do you think that it helped having farmers in the name and just having something recognisable in the name of the party as well? Or do you just think it was purely the farmers putting signs up on the side of the road? Because here in New Zealand, we have our elections coming up in October, and a lot of farmers here are really upset with some of the legislation that our government is pushing through. So if you were to give them any advice about how to go about running a successful campaign, what do you think are some of the key features that BBB did that could translate into New Zealand as well?
For sure, the name and their front woman. She is not a typical politician. She's just a very normal woman talking normal talk, and not aggressive when she doesn't agree. She still needs, but she says it like it is. She doesn't use difficult words. She looks like a farmer. She acts like a farmer, and she acts and just like one of them. And I guess that is very, very important. Be like them, and show it.
Do you think the large protests had a real impact on voter turnout in terms of people understanding the pressure that the farmers have been under?
Yes, I think so. The protest, we had a big rally in The Hague, and we did a lot of campaigning, vote them out, vote them out, vote them out. And the outcome to this election was higher than 4 years before. And that is actually very special, because also what you see in the movement, that there are a lot of people that don't believe in the government anymore and believe there's a whole new movement here. Don't vote, be sovereign. So don't vote, give your power to the government. So a lot of people didn't vote because they don't believe in the government. So yeah,
do you think that that's a dangerous outlook, though, to not vote and just, because you're just handing votes to the people that are definitely going to turn up, which is often the people that are more left-wing, they'll, or the radical, I say the radical left now, because I would have classed myself as a typical liberal. And so now I just think you've got this radical side, which has a very extreme agenda that most people, if they understood it, would not be comfortable with, but they seem to definitely turn up. And so by not showing up to vote, you're just giving those votes straight to that radical side?
Yes. I was monitoring the elections here in my distriction, and I could see that there are still a lot of left votes. And the people that think alike, a lot of them didn't show up. And their argument is, I don't want to give my power to the government. But they did. They just gave their vote to the left wing. So, I don't understand. I do understand, but it's when the masses don't vote, then it's effective. But this is just an in-between. And when it's in between, not voting is giving your vote to the other party.
Mm. Yeah. I always say to people, I'm like, you can't sit and talk online about how terrible the government is or go to a protest if you don't turn out to vote. I'm not interested in what you have to say. I'm actually not. Because if you can't even get up off the couch and go and vote, then why on earth should I listen to what you have to say online or anywhere else? Because it's completely irrelevant, because all you are is a complete sideliner. So that's my personal take on it. I've got no time for it. Vote for someone, vote for anyone, but do a little bit of research. But at the same time, if you don't turn up to vote, but you expect me to listen to you, not going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. But that is the whole movement of sovereignty and common law is growing massively. So it's not, I'm not interested in voting or blah, 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 but it's growing massively. And then you can have discussions. I had discussions like what you said, but they say, no, I'm not going to give, this is my fight. So I don't believe in it. I believe in, now we still have that corrupt government, and we have to get rid of them. And it only helps if you vote them out.
Exactly. Yeah. You can only get rid of corruption if you actually show up to the voting booth. Outside of that, sitting at home talking about common law from your couch isn't really going to do anything, is it? All right. Hey, Angela, Thank you so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate it. Your insight into what's been happening in the Netherlands has been fantastic. And I hope you have a great day. We'll stay in touch and keep me informed with any updates that's happening with BBB and the Future Coalition, because we'd love to keep people here updated.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
All right, everyone, thank you for listening. We are going to take a break for you to listen to some music, and when we come back, we're going to be informing you on the level of censorship that has been happening not only in the States, but that affects the entire world. And no surprise, it is government sponsored. All right, everyone, have a fantastic short break, and we'll be with you soon. This is the Chantelle Baker Show, and you're listening to Reality Check Radio. Welcome back to the Chantelle Baker Show. You're listening to Reality Check Radio, and you've just heard some fantastic interviews and bits of insight about what's happening over in the Netherlands with the Netherlands farmers and the massive citizen movement win in the parliament. So it's very exciting times for the Netherlands. Something else that I really feel like we need to talk about before the show wraps up is what is happening with the level of censorship that we are seeing online. And at the beginning of all the lockdowns, of all of that craziness, it kind of felt like there was a lot of information that was being presented to us in lockstep. It felt like it was all happening simultaneously. It didn't really feel like a natural reaction to an extreme situation that it was happening around the world. So we're going to unpack a little bit about why it may have felt like that and who's kind of pulling some of these strings when it comes to censorship. Are they censoring the truth? Or are they censoring what they don't want you to know? Let's kick in to the Vitality Project.
The Virality Project.
Oh, sorry.
I remember this one very clearly, Chantelle, very early on, going through the first lockdown and just looking at this and thinking, how is this happening? And making all sorts of comments about, how the media was in lockstep. And it was really obvious to some of us who saw it at that time. And I remember someone very close to me saying, oh, don't be stupid. How on earth could they get everybody to say the same things at the same time? And this is how they did it. This is it. We're looking at it right now. Matt Taibbi came out with the latest Twitter files. This is Twitter files number 19. There's a lot of information that's come out from this. And this latest one is the Stanford University Virality Project. So this is just one of many that is doing this. And what they're doing is they are censoring information that is coming through. And the strangest, the most egregious thing out of all of this is that they're actually even going after information that is true. And they're open about it as well. I find it absolutely extraordinary.
Well, I would say that it's not that they're also going after information that's true. It's that they're mainly going after information that's true. When I read these Twitter files, when I read the information that they were censoring, they're not looking for information that they say is actually false. It's all stuff that we now know to be true. So they're calling it false. They're saying it needs to be censored, but this is active and true information that the public needed to have. And unfortunately, there's a big censorship machine in the Virality Project, which did work with government agencies, it worked with the FBI, it worked with multiple organizations around the world to make sure that you didn't know the truth. And that's what's really terrifying.
And the thing about that, the truth, is that the whole reason that they were talking about that was because they wanted to stop what they call vaccine hesitancy. And we now know that there are dangers with those injections. And to think that, we're talking about people, if we're stopping stories that fuel vaccine hesitancy, we're actually condemning people to getting hurt by these things. And no matter how, they're trying to inject the entire world with them. So there are going to be people that get hurt. And I find this not just extraordinary, but also really very frightening that this could happen.
Yeah, I want to read you a short breakdown of the Twitter files just so that people listening at home can really get like a bite-sized understanding of it. So this is a quick debrief by the New York Post. And it said Taibbi, who's Matt Taibbi, Schellenberger, Barry Weiss, and other reporters partnered with new Twitter owner Elon Musk and began publishing the Twitter files, which are internal documents and communications which detailed how the social media giant's previous management team sought to silence controversial voices and suppress news items such as the posts reporting on Hunter Biden's laptop. Now, some of you may know, but right before the last election with Trump and Biden, it got discovered that this laptop, I think there was about 4 or 5 laptops actually, that Hunter Biden had dropped off to an IT technician to get fixed. He never come to collect them. The time to collect them had been over by a couple of years, and so the IT guy, after trying to contact Hunter numerous times, gave them to, I believe it was Fox News or some kind of outlet like that. They started publishing what was on this laptop, shocking revelations, including his work with the Ukraine oil company, including his connections with CCP officials, all in financial dealings that were really dodgy, seeing him with different kind of illegal substances. It was an outrage. And rather than telling people that this story was true, and rather than being honest with the public, Twitter, alongside many other social media companies, decided to suppress that information and label it Russian disinformation, which was a lie. And if they had been honest about this, it could have changed the outcome of the US election. So I don't know if you call this election tampering, but it's definitely public manipulation, and it is disgusting that they've been allowed to get away with this and lawsuits haven't been filed yet.
Yeah, and look, I looked through this latest Twitter files. This is Twitter files number 19, and it's by Matt Taibbi, and you go through it, and the 3 that jump out at me. Number 15, it talks about how they're focusing on things that are driven a larger anti-vaccination narrative about the loss of rights and freedoms. We expect the vaccine passport debate to continue as a key talking point, especially bridging the anti-vax community with the right-wing media sphere. So what that's saying, that is that's a direct email from the Virality Project to Twitter. This is how they talk to each other. And in this particular case, they're taking a political stance. They're talking about right-wing media spheres. In point number 25, they talk about natural immunity being suppressed. In point number 21, they talk about stopping people just asking questions. I mean, this is extraordinary. We're talking about we're not allowed to ask questions anymore. I remember that also being used very early on in our experience here in New Zealand, as if that's some sort of conspiratorial way of conducting your life, just asking questions. How does that make us feel as journalists?
Just one source of truth. Just follow it. Just don't ask questions, because if you do, you're clearly a right-wing extremist. That's how they frame everything, isn't it? And you know what's so funny to me? I never even really knew much about left or right wing before getting heavily, mainly involved helping my father in his kind of recent campaign within the last few years. And then obviously speaking out a lot myself, I've started to kind of see what people mean. But I've only really probably been a lot more left leaning, I would say, or definitely a very, very kind of really loose liberal, just do whatever you want, really relaxed. And you were very much a left-winger up until all of this happened. And so they just label people right-wing extremism now if you just say things like, oh, I think the nuclear family is good, which is a mum, a dad, and kids. Apparently you're a right-wing extremist and you don't even know it.
I find it really interesting because, when all this madness started, I remember it only took there was a period of about 3 months where my whole worldview completely turned around, because suddenly you're talking about things like, you're just suddenly you find yourself on the other side of the spectrum, like you were just pointing out. One of the stories which has just come out in the last couple of days that would be called disinformation, according to the Virality Project, is the story about the German health minister. He's come out recently on national television to say that the COVID-19 vaccines can cause permanent disabilities. It's extraordinary. This is a guy who is in charge of his country's health response to all of this. And if the Virality Project and our Disinformation Project and everybody else who's all these fact checkers around the world are to have their way, then this health minister would be silenced right now. And you read some of these quotes that this guy is talking about. he was asked, what do you say to those who've been affected by vaccine injuries? And his reply was, what's happened to these people is absolutely dismaying, and every single case is one too many. I honestly feel very sorry for these people. There are severe disabilities, and some of them will be permanent. This is the kind of information that we're going to suppress. That's incredible.
My heart just breaks for any family that has been affected by this because, I mean, this German health minister was called Germany's Fauci. So for Germany's Fauci to turn around and say, I'm sorry, and what we did was wrong, that is huge. But what's even worse is the suppression of this information that's still currently ongoing here in New Zealand, because if something is going to affect your family, you deserve the right to know. And my stance on all of this has been, I've always been very pro all vaccinations. It's not something I've ever looked into in the past. It's not something I've ever been concerned about. And when all of this came out, the only thing that made me wait was I just said I wanted time because I was worried about any health risks. I just really wanted time. And at the time there was talk of fertility, and me and Jacob really want to have a family at some point. So that was a really sore point for me where I was like, I'm just going to wait because I just want to make sure that I protect my ability to have a family in the future if there is anything in this that people aren't told about, or if there's any reaction in the future, because you're never going to know down the line if this product is brand new, what it could possibly result in. And so I just feel really devastated for these families that could have had options, that could have been told about the risks and made an informed decision. And at least then they would have felt some sort of, I guess, peace or at least justification over what has happened. But when we had our health minister, our prime minister, every TV station host telling people it's safe, it's effective, it's safe and it's effective, and neither of those things were actually true, you have caused damage on these poor people that they've now got to live with potentially for the rest of their lives. And you see people online saying, just move on, it's not a big deal. And I'm like, of course it's not a big deal for you because you haven't been in and out of hospital. You haven't lost someone that you care about. So to you, of course you should move on. But to other people that have seen the damage and the hurt that this has caused, the situation is far greater, and even financially, the system is far greater. We touched at the very beginning of this show on what was happening in France and on how they were unable now to afford their pensioners. They were going to have to raise the pension age. They're running out of money. They spent $454 billion. And that's, sorry, not even dollars, that's billion euros. So that's nearly $1 trillion New Zealand dollars on their COVID measures. And then you think about it and you go, for what exactly? And based on what information? And if information wasn't suppressed here, what would that mean for the future of France's healthcare and for their financial options as well? How much better off would that country be if we actually had the right information given to us at the right time, or sorry, given to them at the right time? So it's far more wider reaching than just simply this one issue. And that's the problem when it comes to censorship. And it's something that's ongoing here in New Zealand. We've seen our she's special, she's not special forces, she's Secret Service or something like that, isn't she? The lady with the curl at the front. She looks like is it Dr. Evil? Is it the person from Dr. Evil or something that had the wee swirl?
She was on one of those Austin Power movies, I'm sure of it.
Yes, you're right. It was Austin Powers, and he's like, $1 million. And you're kind of thinking, that's not that much to overthrow the world.
But, you have personally, you've come up against this yourself. As you say, this is not just a vaccine issue. This goes across any issue that we're dealing with right now, that the government pushes on us. We've been seeing the same sort of discussions and the same sort of lack of transparency on discussions over things like co-governance, for instance, and Three Waters and so on. And you personally, this is one of the reasons one of the things that amazes me about you is that you're just one person who got on a Facebook page and Facebook Live, and you showed people what was actually going on at Parliament during the protests. People could watch for themselves and see what was going on. And yes, you were commentating on it, but you couldn't edit the visuals at all. Yet this is what you've come up against, the Disinformation Project here in New Zealand, which is the same sort of thing as this Virality Project that we're talking about, but the Virality Project is perhaps on steroids. What's been your experience with that, and what have you seen?
Me and my fiance Jacob laugh about this so often because I'm sitting there on the couch, and I've got my tiny little fluffy dog, and we're just talking back and forth about the craziness of these last few years. And we're like, in what planet would you have expected like little old me just kind of like, I'd just go out to town partying and just have my easy fun life. And then I start talking out online about things that I think are, a fundamental breach of our human rights. And that kind of blows up. And next minute we're pretty much labeled domestic terrorists.
I guess that's what you get called for just asking questions, right?
For just asking questions. And it's not like I've gone out of my way to do anything remotely considered harmful to anybody. It's like, yeah, I've got political opinions that I share, and I'm also really open to people talking with me and changing my mind on my opinions, but I want to be able to talk freely, and I want other people to come and talk with me freely, and I don't think that we should be silencing people that we disagree with. And it's like, I might block someone from my Facebook page if they're abusing me, but I don't want them to be taken off Facebook. I would never go and, try and report all their accounts for the horrible things that they do, because it's like, they have their right to freedom of speech as much as I have my right. However, that doesn't go both ways. You won't find that on the other side. They don't want you to even have a voice. I saw a lady posting about me the other day, and she goes, Facebook and Twitter, when will you take this like white supremacist off all your platforms? She shouldn't be heard. And I think that's exactly the problem. You, A, are completely false about me, but B, you want me completely removed because you don't think that people you disagree with should be allowed to have a discussion that you don't like. And that's fundamentally the problem here in New Zealand. And it's getting worse with these government agencies, because what's happening is the kind of Marxist ideology, and a member of our team, Phil, does a wonderful report called the Intel Report, and he deep dives into some of the members of the Disinformation Project. He's going to be doing other agencies as well. He's ex-Special Forces, and he worked in intelligence with anti-human trafficking over in Thailand. A phenomenal guy, really, really intelligent, and just really great to listen to and get educated from. And he kind of breaks down the Marxist ideology that really drives a lot of these groups. And they've kind of infiltrated slowly into the army, infiltrated slowly into the police, and they take little steps at a time. So people don't realize that fundamentally they are being driven by Marxism. So they want to tear down the family unit. They want to make sure you don't have like private enterprise. It's all of these things that are really beneficial, especially to families and to individuals, for them to grow as humans. That's fundamentally what they want to take away. And you can see that happening. They want to split parents away from their children, and you see that happening with the education system. And I'm concerned that in the future, we're not going to be allowed to talk about these things, because they would have infiltrated these groups to such an extent that simple disagreement is now disinformation. And I believe we're seeing that play out in reality already.
And the reason that we're seeing that playing out in reality is because when you allow people to do like what you're talking about there, that lady who was just asking questions of you, but she's allowed to ask questions because she's on the right side of the spectrum. Well, she's on the left-hand side, which is the right side at the moment, or something like that. Anyway, it's that self-censorship which actually begins to happen, isn't it? It's, we end up maybe not speaking out because we're worried about the reaction. And I don't think that's the sign of a healthy society if that's where we get to.
No, and I've never actually met a right-wing extremist, not that I know of. I've never actually talked with someone that's really extreme on the right. Like, I've never met anyone that doesn't want women to be able to vote. I've never met anyone, and I'm guessing that's far-right extremism. I don't actually know.
I find it really incredible that they can just pull out all of these. But then, all I think that we ask, or I would ask in that situation, is that we actually get the opportunity to debate it. But unfortunately, when those kinds of accusations are thrown around, or you don't actually get to debate it, the whole point of those accusations is to just silence you and silence the argument.
It's a real problem, I think, with mainstream media as well. And you'll be able to talk about this, actually, how they approach stories, because you used to work in mainstream media, didn't you, with the Australian Associated Press? Well, how about you break down for people how they go about pulling a story, how they go about writing it, putting it out to the public? Like, what's that process like? Is it fundamentally based in accuracy, or what does that look like?
Yeah, when I worked with when I worked with the Australian Associated Press, I worked on there as a sub-editor and a casual time sub-editor, and I worked in the Sydney office there, and basically my job consisted of taking stories that had come from other wire services around the world. Now, wire services are those agencies who have a whole lot of journalists, and they send them out and they write stories, and then they put them out on the wire service, and these stories get picked up by the major newspapers. So the New York Times, the Guardian in England, or here in New Zealand, the New Zealand Herald. You look at the bottom of the stories and you'll see AP or AFP or AAP, or Reuters is another one as well. AP, of course, is the American version. That's the Associated Press. AFP is the French version. That's Agence Française Press, I believe. We shared offices with them at the Australian Associated Press, and that's the Australian version. And then, of course, there's Reuters as well. And so my job at that time was actually to sit there at this computer and take stories from Reuters and AP and AFP, and I would basically rewrite those stories for the Australian and New Zealand audience, and then we would put them out under the name AAP, and that's the abbreviation that you will see at the end of a lot of news stories, and say the New Zealand Herald or on Stuff or something like that. At the bottom of the story, it'll be attributed to wire services. So that's how a lot of these stories actually all sound very, very similar, because they are similar. They come from one of about 3 or 4 or 5 organizations, and then they get dispersed all around the world, and then just sort of made to sound a little bit more local by the local editors. And so to bring it back to the Virality Project, that's exactly how it is happening. It is sounding all the same because it is all the same.
All right, this has been the Chantelle Show. You've been speaking with Chantelle, with our wonderful producer Alistair, and with Angela, live from the Netherlands. We really appreciate the time you've given us today. Hope you found a bit of information in there that was useful and feel a bit more informed for the week to come. We look forward to talking to you next week. We're going to be bringing you a whole lot of new information and news stories from all around the world that the media here just don't seem to be talking about. If you have any feedback for us or topics you want us to cover, you can email us inbox@realitycheck.radio. You can also sign up to see a lot of the videos that I create personally and my team over at operationpeople.com. This has been the Chantelle Baker Show, and this is Reality Check Radio.